failing. But, of course, we prop them up, and as a result of that, everybody in the country ends up paying for bad decisions that nobody, at least on Wall Street, ends up having to pay for.
You've been in private business, you've ran businesses, and so I think you've got a good platform to judge here. What has Obama done? And I'd like to talk. I'd like to get your opinion. It seems like every time we get a new president, and whether Republican or Democrat, suddenly we're involved in a war, and I haven't heard any justifiable reason for going over and attacking other countries, and now we're attacking Libya. What is happening here, Gary?
Well, Clay, I really don't understand. I don't understand why we're in, why we've established this no-fly zone. What are the goals? What are the objectives? From everything that I can see, we're involved in a civil war here. I know that what I've heard is that this is to prevent a genocide from occurring. I also know that genocide occurred in Bosnia under the umbrella of a no-fly zone, so I don't know if that's going to make the difference. And at what point do killings by Gaddafi pick up to the point where ground troops have to become involved? Where was this on the radar screen? Where was this on the radar screen 6 weeks ago?
Recorded live.
Okay, sorry about that. The preparations. Let me go back for just a moment, Gary. You know, when I started the Free American, it was I was following very much your philosophy. I believe the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence were the foundations of this country, and I took an oath to defend the Constitution, as you did as governor. I did it when I was 17, when I joined the Army. No expiration date on that. And after what happened at Waco, I started the Free American. I also started the militias. And I've been demonized ever since. And you were governor when I did that. We came into your office. Representatives of the militia came into your office and met with you. Because the militias, in our viewpoint, you know, what part of the Second Amendment didn't they understand? And we weren't there to be a radical Al-Qaeda type group. We were there at your command. Every able-bodied male between the ages of 18 and 45, and all you had to do is tell us what to do. That's my viewpoint. How did you look at it at that movement? And we're still being demonized. The militias are being demonized, along with Christian identity, along with the veterans, along with the oath keepers, along with the Tea Parties. Everybody that's trying to achieve a little bit of freedom here seems to be getting demonized. And you even recalled a document put out by the ADL FBI through the FBI called Guide to Right-Wing Extremists, and Clay Douglas and the Free American was listed there. Am I such a radical, Gary? Am I a danger to the country? What is happening here? What happened there?
Well, are we all such radicals that we would seek liberty and freedom as opposed to what's happening today, which is this notion of entitlement, which is the notion that we died in World War II for Medicaid and Medicare? Clay, I don't think that's the case. I think right now, I think there's an awareness in this country that has never existed before that I would argue points toward the fact that we need to save this country. And to save this country, we cannot continue to spend more money than what we take in. And to do that, we're going to have to cut $1.6 trillion out of the budget. To do that, we need to start out by talking about Medicaid and Medicare. We need to talk about reforming Social Security so that it's viable into the future. And we need to talk about cutting defense. All these areas can be accomplished. We can take this on. You know, I've been an optimist my entire life. I think this country is made up of optimists, and the optimism that I have right now is that we can address these problems. These problems are fixable. It's not like we can't do this. But if we're going to put our heads in the sand, I think we're going to have a financial collapse. And how that's going to manifest itself is that we will continue to receive our Social Security checks. It's just that they're not going to buy anything because government continues to rack up this record debt. And at some point, the marketplace is not going to buy up government debt anymore. And as you're aware, and people listening are aware, the Federal Reserve right now is buying up our own treasuries. We have a closed loop. It's like Bernie Madoff printing up his own money. This is not sustainable.
And that money is going to back to the banksters. It's going to the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about. And you know, well, maybe we don't have to cut all those services. All we got to do is kill off a few billion people, and everything will run right. I mean, isn't that the goals stated on the Georgia Guidestones?
Well, we've provided liquidity to a market that otherwise would not have liquidity, and without that liquidity, these bonds would be worth a whole lot less money. Government debt would be worth a whole lot less money. So, federal government is propping up our entire the Federal Reserve is propping up our entire financial system. And as all this happens, our dollar continues to devalue in worth, so that day by day we end up with less spending power from one day to the next. This could all be fixed tomorrow if we really embarked on a notion of balancing the federal budget tomorrow.
If this is why we're seeing a rise in 10th Amendment solutions. We've got one state that's not bankrupt that's actually doing pretty well. That'd be North Dakota, and they have their own bank.
Well, I think North Dakota also has to do with the fact that North Dakota may be the new Saudi Arabia of the world. Because of the Bakken oil fields there, which really haven't been completely defined as how large it is, but it is gigantic. There is, again, arguably the new Saudi Arabia exists under North Dakota. Talking about 10th Amendment, talking about Medicaid and Medicare, Clay, I think that the federal government could grant the states a fixed amount of money for health care, Medicaid and Medicare, cutting it 43% to the states, and do away with the strings attached, do away with the mandates, and leave the states to the delivery of health care to the poor and those over 65. 50 laboratories of innovation that all are out in this whole notion of best practices. There would be best practices that would emerge. You know what? There would be failure that would get avoided. But the notion that Washington knows best, the notion that Washington top-down has the answers, that's what has us in the financial condition that we're in right now, which, when you look at the arithmetic, it just doesn't add up. There's just no way we're going to survive this. And yet, on the optimistic side, there is. We can address this, but we've got to do it now. There's no more delaying action that needs to take place right now.
Gary, when you were governor, when you rode through Bingham, New Mexico, you stopped into my little store. I had 5 acres there. I made plans to do something called Liberty Villages. You may have seen that in the magazine. I know that I sent you copies of my magazine. And the whole concept, I said, you know, Obama's idea of greening America is selling the top of that mountain to a foreign corporation so they could build windmills, wind generators on it, and pipe that down to the electric company, and the electric company will be happy to sell you that electricity. So you've got 4 or 5 people in the loop there. making money off of the people. Why not just encourage the independence? Now, whether this is a farm or a neighborhood, and I believe Brad Pitt did this in New Orleans. Go into the neighborhood, put a garden in the backyard, put a wind generator on the roof, put a solar panels on the roof, and sell electricity back to the electric company. Grow your own food so you don't have to eat this genetically modified crap that's killing us and giving us heart attacks. And then, if you're growing your own food and you're generating your own energy from everything God gave us, you don't really need the banks or the government for much, do you? Is that an answer? Is that the reason?
I think you've hit it on the head, and I think that's what this country has always represented, and this is the way that we should be able to live our lives if we so choose, and that's what we've been guaranteed with the Constitution that we should be able to do. I don't see anything in the Constitution about Medicaid and Medicare. I just don't see it. I don't see anything in the Constitution about going and selling foreign despots that we don't like. We may not like them, but you know what? There's just nothing in the Constitution about going and wiping those people out.
You know, we generated a war based on lies against Iraq. Iraqi people never invaded us, and we blamed Saddam Hussein, who was one of George Bush's partners originally. Saddam Hussein. If he was such a dictator, why would he stand up on a balcony of one of his palaces there, waving at 10,000 Iraqis armed with automatic weapons? I never saw George Bush, and I don't think you'll see Obama get up in front of a bunch of NRA members like that.
Well, what you point out is the U.S. government picks winners and losers, and gosh, didn't we provide funding to Al Qaeda when they were fighting the insurgent or fighting Russia in Afghanistan? And hasn't that come back to bite us? And what are we doing in the Middle East right now that's being spread?
I can tell you that
from one country to the next.
I can tell you what we're doing in Afghanistan. Our soldiers are guarding the opium poppy fields that those nasty old Taliban were destroying. And that brings up kind of my next line of questioning here, Gary. I said in 1939, the DuPonts, the Mellons, got our #1 cash crop demonized and made it illegal, thanks to William Randolph Hearst, and they gave him that nice little house up on the hill. He demonized hemp and turned it into marijuana. And since 1939, that's been a war on the farmers. We can't grow the most productive crop in the world. $1 billion crop, as Popular Mechanics referred to it in the 30s. $1 billion crop. And you can't grow it in your backyard here. You can't grow it at all. The farmers can't grow it. And we're putting 1 in every 31 Americans is in prison, on parole, or on probation right now in America today. That's more than any communist country out there. Well, I think the war on drugs was a war on the American people. Am I wrong?
Oh, I completely agree with you. We now have 2.3 million people behind bars in this country, which is the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. We're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country, which I always point out is the population of New Mexico that gets arrested in this country every single year at a cost of about $70 billion a year. I think, Clay, that about 30 million Americans have been subject to our criminal justice system that, but for our drug laws, might arguably otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. This is a war against the people of the United States. Without saying drugs are good by any means, and of course I advocate legalizing marijuana, but without saying that marijuana is a good thing, I think that people that oppose the drug war or people that support the drug war need to understand that that's a war against our kids, our parents, our friends, family, business associates. Every people engage in this activity, and of course, it's never going to be legal to smoke pot, become impaired, get behind the wheel of a car, or do harm to others. But gosh, smoking pot in the confines of your own home, doing no harm to anyone arguably other than yourself, should that be criminal? Just like alcohol? No. And didn't we try and prohibit the sale of alcohol? I think that we did, and I don't think it worked.
I think that this whole drug war thing is the same thing happened in the war against alcohol, prohibition. They turned our grandfathers and our great uncles into criminals. Oh, suddenly they were manufacturing alcohol to run their Model A's and Model T's and tractors on and for fuel in their lamps. And suddenly they became bootleggers and moonshiners. And right now, I know in my book, Mystery Babylon, I documented the special forces, CIA, and the Mossad involvement in the drug war. Operation Watchtower was flying drugs out of Colombia into Panama, into Noriega, and from there on into America through a little airport called Mena, Arkansas. If the government is supplying the drugs, if our government is over there protecting the opium poppy fields, that means the governments are supplying and we just had that. I just had Larry Pratt on my show talking about the BATF supplying automatic weapons to drug cartels in Mexico, and that's going before a congressional hearing right now. So
what you point out that happens is because of prohibition. I happen to believe that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition related, not use related. That's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but that ought to be the focus. But part of prohibition is corruption, and corruption exists within government, and it exists because of prohibition, no other reason.
It's a if the police can come up to you and shake you down on the street and take you into jail for something you got in your pocket, I'd say that's a police state.
Well, and of course, not all police act in such a manner.
No,
but
they don't.
I think because of our drug laws, I think law enforcement has taken a really bad rap, and that law enforcement is less respected as a result of our drug laws than they otherwise would be.
Well, you know, I've pointed out, if I want to smoke pot, and I can go out in the backyard and pull off a bud and come in the house and sit down and roll it up and smoke it, we wouldn't have any drug cartels here.
Well, and you know, 28,000 deaths south of the border over the last 4 years, and I'm talking about now Mexico.
Yes.
If we can't connect the dots between prohibition and violence, I don't know if we ever will. I think legalizing marijuana would arguably dry up 75% of the border violence with Mexico, that being the estimate of the cartel's activities that are engaged in the marijuana trade.
That's right. The answer is real simple, but let's see. We've got private prisons now on the stock market. If we legalize drugs, who would we arrest? Who would we have to pick up? I mean, there's just not enough thieves out there to keep the business going, you know?
Well, you know, I'm an advocate for privatization of any government service that can provide the same service, the same products at lesser prices. In the case of New Mexico, I didn't see the private prisons lobbying for more people locked up, but what I did see the private prisons providing was the same goods and services as the public side for about 2/3 of the cost.
Okay.
I think that we should always be looking at ways to reduce costs within government. I think that the largest or the biggest protest against Proposition 19 in California, which was the initiative to legalize marijuana, came from the public prison union.
Okay, well,
who have a real vested interest in keeping people locked up.
well, you justify their existence. They got to do that. So, what is? But are the attitudes changing? You know, part of this. If you talk about legalization of marijuana, then somebody's going to accuse you of being liberal. You know, well, I'm conservative. You know, he's a liberal, and or you know, I'm a Democrat. He's a Republican. You know, it's divide and conquer. I mean, it seems to me we're all Americans, and if it's good for you and your family and your children, then it's going to be good for your neighbors.
Well, I happen to think that there couldn't be more of a conservative position than talking about marijuana from the standpoint of how much money are we spending and what are we getting for the money that we're spending. Half of what we're spending on law enforcement, the courts, and the prisons is drug-related. And to reiterate, what are we getting for that? Well, we're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country on drug-related crime, and we now have 2.3 million people behind bars.
I was one of those. People, and I got caught in Texas with some pot when it was a life sentence, and there were people in prison doing life sentences over marijuana.
Well, and there are today, as you know, Clay, there are individuals sitting in prison doing life sentences, and in most cases those life sentences are for selling marijuana, and that's why I have always advocated legalizing marijuana, because if you just talk about decriminalizing marijuana, you turn your back on half the problem, or more than half the problem, which is that, okay, it's decriminalized, well, you still have to buy it, and if the person that's selling it to you is still guilty of a felony that might result in them being locked up for the rest of their life, that's the problem that we continue to have as long as we're not going to address legalizing the product.
Is there now NORML? I helped start NORML many years ago with one of my magazines, promoted it, and is there? There has been some headway, in a sense. The medical marijuana, at least, you know, you can smoke it under that and not go to jail, you know, if somebody happens to come by and smell it. But the idea of having to go to a doctor and pay the medical industry, who are, by the way, responsible for at least 20,000 deaths a year from prescription medication, and only 15,000 people a year die of heroin, cocaine, or methamphetamine, or illegal drugs. And nobody's ever died of smoking marijuana. Zero.
Well, I agree with you, Clay. I've got another interview that I've got to get into, but it's been great being with you.
I appreciate you being with me, Gary Johnson, and we've got links to your America's Initiative. If there's any way that I can help or work with you, I'd be more than happy to. I really appreciate your work.
Well, again, I appreciate talking with you today. We'll look forward to talking to you in the future.
All right, sir. Thank you very much.